From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, "Let the children feed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took the deaf man aside in private, away from the crowd, put his fingers into his ears and spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to the heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, and his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astonished beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
One Holy Week, my family and I went to England. We went on Holy Week so that we could visit various cathedral churches, Coventry, Salisbury, Canterbury, St. Paul's, and London, on their festival days, Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, Easter. It seemed to be a very good idea for a then professor of worship, but because of one mistake I made, we almost didn't make it. We landed at Heathrow, rented a car, and began to travel my plan. The problem occurred just outside of London when the highway comes to a roundabout, these circles that you weave your car through a lot of traffic and try to get off at your preferred exit. I knew the British drive on the wrong side of the road, which is the left side, rather than the American way on the right side, which is the right side. And I had observed that pattern until the roundabout. But I was preoccupied with trying to find the exit, and when we got back on our highway, I inadvertently started driving on their side of the road, the wrong side of the road, the right side of the road, our right side of the road, or whatever. If it hadn't have been for the screams of my startled passengers, we would have been killed, or could have been killed. I'm not familiar with your driving habits, but I think there's probably something like mine, going all the way back to our driver's permit, our learner's permit. We sometimes go on autopilot and follow those safe old patterns we've always known. The problem is, sometimes the safe old patterns don't work in new situations. Something similar happened to me as a Christian lately. After many years of thinking I had grasped this Christian faith thing, I now think I have been driving to some extent on the wrong side of the road. Let me explain. I was taught and accepted certain explanations as to the meaning of Christianity, but now there are voices screaming in my head saying there are potential dangers about following those same old patterns. As a student for about 2 decades, public schools, college, seminary, graduate school, I just automatically assumed that the pastors, the teachers, the professors knew what they were talking about, especially in matters of faith and theology when we got that far. My role as a student was to be a learner, to listen, to take notes, to pass tests, to adopt what they said, and eventually to pass it on to others. I was not there to consider options or debate what they had said. In fact, I can never remember a class from elementary school through graduate school where it was wise to contradict a professor. Wisdom, knowledge, dispensed by authoritative figures can be very seductive. An Old Testament proverb goes this way: wisdom sends out her servant girls who from the heights call to the townspeople and say, "You ignorant people, come on in. I've got bread and I mixed some wine for you. Don't be simple-minded. Come on in and learn of me, of my great knowledge and insight." It drips with sarcasm, of course. Well, I think I ate her bread, wisdom's, knowledge, and drank her wine, and now I have indigestion, or something like it. Now I'm more in tune with what St. Paul wrote. God has made the wisdom of the world look foolish. God has chosen something foolish in the world to shame the wise. As a pastor, teacher, preacher, I drove down those old roads that I knew, and then the light changed, as it tends to do in your life sometimes, so that I began to suspect that this knowledge I had absorbed and dispensed to others as to the key meaning of Christianity, well, it wasn't exactly wrong, just incomplete, inadequate. For many, think this through in your own life. Christian faith is kind of seen as a cerebral thing, a mental thing, an idea, a belief, a doctrine you mentally adopt. As we learn in confirmation classes and beyond, some of the basics of the faith are important to learn: the Lord's Prayer, the Ten Commandments, the Creed. And indeed, all that may be a starting point. But everything depends on the question that comes after you've learned all that. So what? So what? So what after you have all that knowledge in tow? I've also come not only to distrust wisdom by itself, for itself, in and of itself, I've come to distrust words. That's hard for me because I have words in my DNA. My father was a newspaper man and lawyer, and at one point my mother says he attempted to learn the whole dictionary. I hope it was a small dictionary. But words, even great words, crack, fail. Words deceive as well as tell the truth. Words can become impotent. Studies show that the relevance of the church in today's world is in serious decline, both in membership but also in relevance to what's going on. You may hear a lot about religious things, but in terms of it affecting lives, that's something different. This can be blamed on many trends. Some say it's technological. Some say it's kind of a growing up, in the wisdom of the world kind of thing. But maybe the world has just gotten tired of our words. Maybe they hear us use words to fight each other. Maybe they hear our tirades out there. They note how at times we pretend to speak for God. What an arrogant thing. They notice that our deeds don't match our words. Words and wisdom, not completely to be trusted. We were in Amish country this summer up in Holmes County in Berlin, Ohio. And as we passed one tourist trappy place after another, on the sidewalk there was a man who was aggressively confronting sidewalk walkers like us. He had a straw hat on. I guess he was a pretend Amishman because the Amish wouldn't do this. Had a Bible or something in his hand, and he was stopping people and saying, "Have you received Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" I know you've heard that before. I've heard it many times before, and I usually just walk on past, take the brochure and throw it in the next trash can. But this time I had a moment. My wife was in one of the shops or something, and another one of the shops or something. And I said to him, I'm a pastor, and I've been a theological professor, and I think your question is misleading and counterproductive when it comes to evangelism. I was serious, you know. He listened and smiled, and then he said to me, yeah, but have you accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? I should have said, okay, so what? So what if I have? Tell me about the so what. Well, Lutherans, you know, do slogans too every now and then, like salvation through faith by grace, or is it by grace through faith? I can never get that straight. We talk about things that are good to know, equations about God, how we can figure out the Trinity. You know, we're taught 3 and 1 and 1 and 3, and yet not one. You know, maybe you figured that equation out and can say it over well. But even those overused phrases, even biblical ones, lose power and degenerate into cliches, such as we wear on T-shirts or bumper stickers. St. James said it well this morning, if you heard that. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but you don't have works? If someone is naked or hungry, and you say to them, work a little harder, you can find a way to keep warm and get fed. So what good are your words of encouragement if you yourself do not actively supply their needs? So he says, faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. In My Fair Lady, I think one of my favorite old musicals, two upper crust English types wager that one of them, a linguist, can't take a Cockney flower girl and make her into a proper British lady. I mean, the language, the etiquette, the way to walk, the style of clothes, just everything, and pass for a British lady. Eliza the girl, Eliza Doolittle, makes real progress, but at times just gets frustrated with learning the language over and over again, being corrected. And besides that, there's some romantic things going on in the air. And at one place in the musical, she says, words, words, words. I'm so sick of words. I get words all day long. Then she sings, sing me no song, read me no rhyme, don't waste my time. Show me. Don't wait until wrinkles pop out all over my brow. Show me now. Show me, Eliza says. Show me, James says. Show me the world challenges. Show your faith in motion. Show your faith active in love. Don't wait until wrinkles pop out all over your brow. Show me now. Last month, and you know, you got to realize, I have heard, like a lot of pastors, the lessons that we read over and over again. I read them outside of church, and last month was all about John 6. It were a Eucharistically themed chapter about bread and wine, in which Jesus says, I want you to take me into myself. I want you to devour and savor who I am. I want you to imbibe me so that you become me. Physically, spiritually, you and I become one in our ministry to the sick and poor, seeking justice for the downtrodden, even dying for the truth. He says, to quote, if you don't abide in me and me in you, you have no part in me. In those passages, he's saying, in effect, I go on living through you. I heard these words, and I, for the first time, began to take them seriously. You know, the church has argued for centuries over what happens in the Lord's Supper, how the bread and wine become body and blood, transubstantiation versus this, versus that. It's been one of the biggest dividing things in the ecumenical churches of the world. But I see now, it isn't at all about what happens between the bread and the wine and body and blood. It's not about that transformation. It's about us being transformed. That's what the whole chapter's about. That we're transformed. That's the miracle in the whole thing. Forget about the other. We're to use this bread and wine as if we were really, and we are, feeding on Christ himself, becoming Christ. That's a miracle. Becoming his real presence, as we like to stress in the Lord's Supper. Now, for me, that was a tremendous revelation. I don't even know if I communicated it well. It changed completely my perspective of what happens in the Lord's Supper. The first Christians in Acts were not called Christians. That word only appears twice in the New Testament. The word Christianity doesn't appear at all. They were called followers of the way. The way. Not a way of thinking or believing, a way of being, a way of acting, a way of living, a lifestyle. A friend of ours was over last week, a young friend who is fairly agnostic on a lot of things, and he said, I forget how it came up into conversation, he said, I just don't do organized religion. And I had presence of mind enough to say, well, the other option's disorganized religion. I wish I had given him a third option. I don't do religion. I don't do religion. The early church didn't do religion. They made a point to say we are not religious like other religions, the emperor worship and all the rest of that. We are a way of life. We are a way of life, not, quote, unquote, a religion. Jesus is remembered as a great teacher, no doubt about it. I'm taking a course right now at home on great moments that changed the world, and we study people like Confucius and Buddha and so forth. They were great teachers too. But none of them translated their teaching into works. The way Jesus did, it was those things you heard in the gospel today that propelled his movement forward. Those were the striking things. That's why people couldn't shut up. That's why they were running all over telling about it. He does astounding things. His words grew right out of, his works grew right out of his words. Last month, Bud Crabtree died. He lived near Lithopolis. He may have worked for some of you. I bet somebody after the first service he did work for as a paper hanger. Really good at it. He redecorated our house. He was always smiling, friendly, but our brief encounters never let me know what was beneath the smiles and the good paper hanging. At his funeral last month, 2 former state prison inmates from the Chillicothe Correctional Institute told about how Bud had gone down there over and over again to minister, to be a sympathetic listener to those prisoners. Even the warden came to the funeral and spoke about it. These men also said, even when we were paroled and were frustrated with trying to get back into the flow of life, he came and helped us. I never knew that about Bud Crabtree, and it completely changed my perspective on who he was. After hearing that, I no longer think of Bud as a smiling, sweet paper hanger. For me, the truly memorable thing that blots everything else was his humble, self-sacrificing love. Bud didn't just talk of love, he showed it. He didn't just answer the street preacher with an empty affirmation and so forth. He lived a form of costly grace, a grace that comes from true discipleship. He didn't just simply act like Christ to those people. He was Christ. Some of us get to the point where we wonder how our lives will be measured. Of course, that job is above our pay scale. But what does it mean? You hear people say, oh, he lived or she lived a good life. So what's that mean? Didn't smoke, drank moderately, paid his taxes, kept his grass cut, wasn't athletic but loved the football games, was married and adopted, and had added three children to the population, which according to our studies is just right for a person of his generation. Went to church most of the time. When there was peace, he was for it. When there was war, he was for it. Good life. That hardly says anything. It's trivial compared to our friend's quiet dedication to his prison ministry. I came to realize that the thing that gives credibility to a life, that stands out finally, that shines, is this selfless service to others. That's what lends credibility to a Christian life, to a human life, period. Show me, Eliza sings, and she's right. Show me, the world shouts, and it's right. Show me, our faith demands, that's right too. Don't deceive yourself, said St. James. Be doers of the word.